Morning, everyone. Give them a couple minute or so to let everyone else get in. All right, it's 9:01. We're just going to start in with some introduction here and get a little bit into what we're going to talk about today to allow anyone else to get in within the next minute or so before Kevin starts. But I wanted to say welcome to everyone for our first annual business series class that's brought to you by the New England Pest Management Association. My name is Adam Karachi, and I chair the Retention and Recruitment Committee for both New England Pest Management and Quality Pro on the national level. Our goal of this series is to help our current members, future members, and other people in the industry grow their business and continue to flourish in the industry that we all love. Please continue to watch the classes that are coming up over the next 5 months and let everyone know that you can. The more participation that we have, the better these classes will be. Most of the classes that we're going to have will be recorded, and about a week after they're finished, we will send out the recording to everyone. We'll post them for our members. But if you have any questions with that, you can reach out to me or to New England Pest Management itself, and we'll make sure we help you with that. With that being said, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Kevin Lemasters brings over 30 years of experience in our industry. He's had experience at multiple companies, both big and small, so Kevin's seen it all. Kevin's the owner of Action Leadership and is going to take time today on how to cultivate and find managers and great team members for your company. So without further ado, Kevin, welcome and thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Appreciate that. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. Those of you that are on the call, appreciate you being here as well. Will Weaver, hope your dad's doing all right. Kelly, welcome. Good to see you here. So I think throughout the webinar today, I'm gonna a couple times ask you guys to engage with me through the chat. So again, I want to make sure that this provides some interaction as well. So those of you who don't know who I am, I started in the pest control industry back in the early 90s, 93, I believe. And my first 5 or 6 years worked as a pest control technician and then landed with a regional company based out of Topeka, Kansas. Spent most of my career, about 14 years, working with them and moving up from the technician to a service manager to a branch manager, and ultimately the operations manager for that organization. And helped them grow from a $3 million to a $14 million business. We covered 6 states. We had 8 offices that we service clients in. From there, I moved on to Copasan. Those of you who have been around the industry for a while remember Copasan. So I had an opportunity to work with them for a while, and I went out and supported the servicing companies that service national account business throughout North America. Different perspective and a different way to see how we delivered service throughout the country. And then kind of my last stint, hands-on in the business, I partnered with a friend of mine out in Loveland, Colorado, north of Denver. If you're going to Pest World in the next couple of weeks, it's about an hour north of there. So I spent 9 years out there. We, grew that business before exiting. And so just, some different experiences over the years. And so as I cover this material today, I'll tell you that, I've had the opportunity to learn a lot of this, in the School of Hard Knocks, if you will. So the things that I'm going to talk about today are, certainly going to be things that I dealt with and I figured out how to navigate, and or I learned from other people, as well as my own mistakes, to get there. So as we kick off today, I titled this "Help, I Need a Manager," based off of my conversation with Adam and kind of what he was wanting to accomplish today. So many companies in our industry, as you know, are smaller organizations, and they don't have the resources that bigger companies do. And sometimes, when you get to that point where you need that that helper, that other manager in your business. You've been successful, you've navigated how to hire people and to get out and get the service taken care of and take care of your clients. But getting that next person to come in and be a manager for you is a new experience, right? And we're all wired differently and approach things differently. So I tried to package this today in a way that hopefully it'll add value. No matter where you're at, whether you're in a small company, whether you're in a large company, and what you're trying to accomplish. So let's jump into today's training. So, most first-time managers never receive any formal training for their role. This past summer, I was doing some workshops. I was doing learning labs at MPMA Academy, and I had the opportunity to work with about 60 people in 2 workshops on this topic around middle management training and helping to train them up. And when I asked who has a training plan for this role, only about 4 or 5 people raised their hands, so about 8%. And I was curious, what Google had to say. So I went out and Googled this, and my internet search gave me a number closer to 40%. Now, I can tell you in my 30 years in the industry, I really think that number is closer to 10 to 15%, and not the 40%. So I would ask you, if you put in the chat, how many of you actually have a formal training program for your first time managers? I'm curious. A thumbs up or a hands up, if you have a training program, a formal training program for your first time managers. So yeah, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. I'm not seeing any thumbs up or hands up. So, and I would tell you that even large organizations, don't have it. I mean, I talk to and work with companies that are 20, 30, $40 million organizations that don't have a formal training program for the manager level people in their organizations. And so, when we think about, most of the companies in our industry are smaller, right? I mean, they're $1 million or less. And so they may have one manager other than the owner inside of that company. So how do we get there, right? If that training is not in place. So keeping in mind that most people out there haven't had training, let's kind of get things kicked off. So how does information help us? What do we need to be thinking about as we are ready to put that first manager or leader in place inside of our organization? So I think the first question is, do we hire, do we promote? Many first-time managers inside of organizations are promoted, and they're promoted because they did such a great job in their current role, whether they were in the office on the admin side or whether they were out in the field, on the service side. They were a rock star, right? And so we saw all of these, character elements in them, and we're like, wow, this person is going to be a great manager for me. So we promote them, and then we get a few months down the road, and then we wonder why things aren't going so well, right? So then maybe, we put them back into the role that they were before, or maybe, things just didn't work out in a way and they leave us. So now it's like, well, gosh, you know what? Let me go hire somebody, right? Let me go out into the marketplace. There's got to be somebody out there that has exactly what I need. They know how to be a good manager. They've got leadership traits, and I'll just get somebody in here, and that way it'll be easy for me. And so those are kind of the 2 different, thought processes that people use when they've gone out to try to get this person in place for the first time. So how do we hire the right person? First we need to start with a clear job description. Role clarity is helpful for everybody to understand expectations. Some individuals may not want to, run around or be on the phones. If they think that, hey, I'm getting promoted to a leadership role, sometimes they think that's taken them completely out of the hands-on aspect of that position. In my experience in our industry, even the largest organizations out there, a service manager, an office supervisor, office manager, they're still spending some time, with their, doing the tasks, right? Sometimes the service manager has to go out and do the service work and cover for somebody who's out sick. Or when you're down 3 technicians in the springtime and things are going crazy, or their phones are blowing up and you're down a CSR in the office, right? So really having a clear, understanding of what's expected of them as you're going through that interview process and that call process. Where do we post, right? Over the years, if you've been in the industry more than 10 years, you probably remember we used to hire from Craigslist. How many hands up? How many of you hired from Craigslist at some point, right? I can remember when that was really the go-to place. We would go out and that's where we found them. Indeed seems to be the most popular in the industry today. When I'm talking to people, that's where they're finding their success. And so you have to know kind of, in the area that you're at, in the region that you're in, are there areas and places where you have better success finding somebody? Going out and just networking, right? I mean, I'm sure most of you guys are probably, if you're sitting in on this webinar, you probably do some level of hiring or have done some level of hiring. And I know when I'm talking to other leaders and managers, we're always keeping our eyes open for somebody who's given us good service, right? So when we're out and about, whether we're at a restaurant, whether we're in just retail or whatever, we're paying attention to the kind of service that we're receiving from somebody, because if they're delivering great service, in their current role, we can probably expect that, when we bring them on for us. So again, just paying attention to, our surroundings and what those opportunities are. And then lastly is, how do we pay them, right?
Kevin, can I interrupt for 1 second?
Absolutely.
You're talking about posting. What is your thoughts on using like headhunters for these positions?
Yeah, that's a great question, Adam. I know a couple of people who use recruiting agencies or headhunters for this. I certainly think there's some value in that. I'm going to get into some interview stuff. We're actually going to step into interview process here in a few minutes, and that may help provide some clarity around there. We all have different strengths and weaknesses. If you know that you don't have a good hiring program in place, or that you're not a good hiring person, and some people just aren't, right? We all have different strengths and weaknesses. First, hopefully you have the self-awareness to know that and recognize that. And I would say if that's you, then I think a headhunter makes sense. If you've had no success bringing good people in, it may just be because that's just not an area where you excel in. So find somebody who does that well and lean into them. Now, I can tell you, I've had personal experience, as well as I know companies today that use outside resources. And, as I dig in and ask questions and learn more about that, many of those really aren't bringing as much value as I think they could. So there's a lot of power around having a good hiring process. And I'm going to spend a little time on that. I'm not going to spend much time on it, but I think it's a big part of getting the right people in the door. That help?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So again, how do we pay them? That sometimes that's tricky, right? Especially as a smaller organization, you're like, okay, here I'm going to create this role. Part of that role description and role clarity is, I need them to spend 50% of their time doing service work, because that's what I have to offset, their salary, right? So you have to figure out what that looks like. You have to figure out, inside of your organization, from a financial perspective, how that works for you. Most of you probably have connections and relationships with other people in the industry. I would encourage you to have conversation with them, find out, hey, what do you typically pay? What does that look like for you, kind of in our area, in our region? And then you've got to figure out how that fits into your financial model for your business. And, it's going to look different for each of you. Okay. So how do I hire the right person? So what questions do I ask during the interview? So I'm going to just say, I mean, too many times, and I feel like you kind of teed me up for this, Adam, so I appreciate that. But we really undervalue this process. I mean, having a clear hiring plan and sticking to it can change everything for you. Over the years, I used a staffing agency one time to try to find somebody to help me replace an office position, um, more because I was too busy to mess with it than anything else. And they didn't end up helping me solve that problem. I had to go back to what we did well. We had a great hiring process. Um, my leadership team and I, we had it written down. We had a formal plan, and when we look back at when we succeeded and when we failed, when we stuck to our plan and did everything that we said we needed to do, probably 90% of the time we hired the right people. Every now and then somebody would slip through the cracks. But when we look back and see, okay, the people who we got on board that weren't the right fit, somebody on our team, maybe multiple people on our team, didn't follow through with some of the process. And so again, there's a good process that you can follow that's going to help you get the right people on board. So same in this role. So, do you have a scripted interview questions for your interview? I've interviewed people for 25 years, and I can tell you, even today, if I'm working with clients that are asking me to help them get people hired, I still have a list of the Quality Pro interview questions from NPMA. And I have those, and then I have another set of specific questions based off of the position that I'm looking to hire for. And when I engage in that interview, I'm asking specific questions because I want to understand what kind of specific experience they have. What do they bring into the table? Do I need them to have some financial experience and background? If so, can they read a financial report? Do they have a budget? Listen to for some of those things and some of those experiences that may help. How do they make decisions around people issues? Right? I mean, the biggest part of their job really comes down to people. And so how do they navigate that and how do they work through that? So, those of you who do interviews or have interviewed people over times, I mean, you've heard these before, your questions need to be like, tell me about a time when, right? One of the big questions that I always ask is when I talk to your supervisor, what are they going to tell me about this? When I ask your supervisor about how your team members, felt like you led, what are they going to tell me? And so asking questions in a way that really let them know that I'm going to follow up on them so that I'm going to get more of a truthful response from them. Are they strategic thinkers? What are some goals that you have for yourself right now, right? So ask them, what kind of books are you reading? What kind of goals do you have for yourself? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? And, if they're able to really, hone in and answer those questions in a strong manner, then you know that there's some strategic mindset that they already have in place. I'm a big reference checker, I'll tell you that a lot of organizations today will tell you, they don't talk about checking references. Some people say, well, it's just a waste of time to check references. I can tell you that's not been my experience over the years. Let me ask you guys, if I were to call you about somebody who was a rock star for you, and I were to say, hey, Courtney, I was, interviewing, John Smith last week, and I know he worked for you guys over there. He was sharing with me that, if I asked you about how he was a leader in the business, you would tell me that, his people loved him. He went out of his way to get things done for them, and he was really able to accomplish some big goals. Would you say that's pretty accurate? And if I'm asking you those questions, would you give me feedback and information about that individual? Give me a yes or no in the chat. I have a feeling if you had a rock star in your business and I called and did a reference check with you guys,
If you're asking Courtney specifically, I know she's driving in a car right
Oh,
now.
okay. Well, I'm asking everybody. So you guys give me a thumbs up, or give me a yes or a no. If I called you and asked for a reference check on somebody that was a rock star for you, would you give me some feedback? Yeah, yeah. My experience has been, if I called somebody, they're gonna be like, oh my gosh, I would hire this person back in a minute. They're awesome. They're amazing. I wish they wouldn't have left. But if I called you about somebody who wasn't a good fit on your team, you may not tell me how bad they were, but the fact that you don't tell me anything tells me how bad they were. And that's my experience with reference checks. And so again, when I go through the hiring process with people, or the interview process with people, I do ask the questions in a way where I'm like, so Amanda, you told me that your supervisor, at ABC Pest Control was Maria. So when I asked Maria about how your attendance was, what is she going to tell me? And so, yeah, when I'm asking questions in that way, you're more apt to give me a truthful, honest answer, because I've just told you that I'm going to talk to that person. And so being able to frame it that way, but then you need to make sure that you're asking the question, right? And that you do the follow-up and reference checks. Now, I can tell you that depth of process, I don't do early on. I wait and hit that in my second interview. My first interview really is learning more about their resume and their experience and those types of things, but I start digging into that. So again, don't forget just the value of what that looks like. So how would I handle that process if they're still employed? So I would ask them, one, if I could call, and if they said no, you really can't. Now, if they're in a place where they're ready to leave and they have a good relationship with their supervisor, I mean, I've actually had them tell me, you know what, as long as you just call my current supervisor, that's fine, because my current supervisor knows that I'm leaving, and that I'm looking for something else, and I know they'll give me a good reference. So just ask them, make sure that they're okay with that. If they've been at the same company for 15 years and they don't have another, anything other than that, that can make it a little trickier. But my experience is most folks have, not spent more than a handful of years at a couple different places. So you can usually get some pretty good feedback and input. So, but I just ask them if I can make a call or not. So I would not want to put somebody in jeopardy. So what are some of the traits that we're looking for in these individuals, right? We want somebody who's a learner. If you've got somebody who's already on your team, that they're a learner, right? They're asking questions about things, and they're trying to understand, and they're always wanting to grow and do more. They ask good questions. Pay attention to the questions that they ask, or the ones they don't ask, right? It's a good indicator of how they're going to show up on your team. Again, when we're in that interview process, just paying attention and have our radar up. By nature, we as people are not good listeners. We're just not. And so do they listen well, right? And how do we know? Because they listen to reply. I'm sorry, because they listen to understand, not to reply. So, most of us by nature, we listen to reply, right? When somebody's telling us something, or, if we've asked them a question and they start responding, we're already gearing up what our next idea and thought is in our head to give feedback. And a good listener is really tuned in to listen, to understand what's actually being said. And then many times we'll ask another question to follow up and dig deeper into that. So paying attention to, is that person that well, as wired that way as well? Because you want a manager on your team that's going to be a listener, right? They're going to listen to you. They're going to listen to their people. They're going to listen to the customer. So that's one of the traits that we want to keep an eye on. And then lastly, they want to help others. When they're talking, are they using words like I and me, or are they saying things like us and team? Over the years, when I've worked for different organizations, I've always I've always used the terminology we and us. And it's not been about myself, it's been about us as a whole team. And so, you want a leader that's, looking at things from that perspective as well. The Ideal Team Player is a phenomenal book. It talks about these 3 key traits: being humble, hungry, and smart. So in the chat, give me a yes or no if you've read this book. So this is a great book to just have as a resource. If somebody isn't humble, they have a big ego and they'll be all about themselves. They if they're not hungry, then they're not going to have urgency. They're not going to get things done. And if they don't, the smart is more about common sense. So if they're not smart, they're going to lack some self-awareness and common sense awareness around issues. The reason I popped this up here, the book is The Ideal Team Player. It's on the left side of the slide here. So The Ideal Team Player by Patrick Lencioni. This is the model out of it. Those of you who are familiar with Pat Lencioni as an author, he wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, The Advantage. He's got a lot of great books out there, but this is one of my favorites that I've used over the years. You can read this book probably in an hour or less. He tells things in a story form, but this book also provides some interview questions that helps to drill down in some of these key areas. So again, it's a great book. I just recommend, just an extra tool out there that you can use. So we talked about, hiring from the outside and doing the interview process. I do think that, again, we look to interview, when we promote as well, right? So I mentioned earlier, many times when we're going to do a promotion, we're promoting, those people who are at the top of their game inside of our companies, whether it's on the admin or on the service side of our business. So, how do we know, that we're getting the right person in the door? Who is that person? And I would just say that, let's go back to what our key traits are, right? I mean, just because this person was a rock star in their role, sometimes you're so close to it, you can't see everything else around it. And so I would just challenge you not just to think about, how much everybody likes them or the fact that they show up all the time. Maybe they're the easiest person on your team to manage just because it seems like they're just doing all the things they needed to do. But when you sit back and say, okay, now that I'm going to put them in a different role, I'm going to have different expectations of them. Are they a learner? Do they ask good questions? Are they a good listener? And do they want to help others? I would say in most cases, you've probably looked at promoting somebody or have promoted somebody who had most of these traits. So again, coming back and looking at that, even considering, the ideal team player and some of the elements of that, because many times you may have somebody on the technician side, especially, you may have a technician who's humble and hungry, right? I mean, they're humble, they're willing to go out and help everybody and put everybody else ahead of themselves. They're hungry, they're going out and getting it done, but maybe they're missing the smart piece. They don't have the self-awareness. But so now you have somebody who's leading other people, but they don't have the dynamic to engage with them, recognize kind of how they show up and how other people show up and how to, navigate that in an effective way. And so, all of these traits kind of play together, to help out. So we've gotten through all of this, let's say we found our person. Now what, right? So we got a person in the position, hopefully my goal for you is that, after when you get done watching this webinar, go back, write a plan for everything we've talked about up to this point. If you don't have some of those things done and taken care of, get a formal plan in place. Make sure that you've got things ready to go. The goal is to have something to start with. You're going to change it over time. You're going to find what works for you, what doesn't work for you. You're going to have people on your team that you find do certain areas of those things really well. Most importantly, don't wing it. Too many times, we're just flying by the seat of our pants. We need a position, so we go out and we do what we've always done. We just interview people, and the person that everybody seems to like more than others, we put them in that role. And then we wonder why 6 months from now that, things aren't working out. So begin to build some framework, begin to put some things together that, help you have a formal plan, to get things moving along. So what do I need them to know? Now I've got them on board, you only have a limited time during that interview process to really understand what it is that they know. So you need to be intentional, take time to build trust with that new person and help them understand that you don't expect them to know everything. When we used to bring people on board at my last company, one of the things that we would talk about on their first day, we'd say, hey, we have a culture of being transparent and letting people know that we're for them. And so when you make a mistake, not if, when you make a mistake, let somebody know. Get somebody involved so we can come out, we can help get that taken care of, and we can move on. We're not going to beat you up for it. We're not going to make you feel bad about it. We're just going to solve the problem and move on. Now, if we're having the same issue and making the same mistake twice a week or every other week, we're going to have a different conversation. There's probably some training that needs to happen, or, maybe that person just isn't the right fit. So, but we have to give people permission to do these things. They can't read your mind. They're new in your organization, or even if they're not new in your organization, if it's somebody that you promoted up, they get in their own head, right? So, they've been promoted. They're like, okay, this, the owners or the boss or whatever thinks I'm a rock star. I have to be a rock star. Like, I've got to know everything. I've got to be able to solve all the problems. So have a conversation with them and let them know that they don't have to do that they don't have to be, you're not expecting them to come in with all the answers. Encourage them to ask questions and get other people involved when they don't know how to answer as they're learning, your way of doing things. When I say your way, your company's way, right? Everybody has a culture in their organization and has a way they like to get things done. So you're bringing somebody in from another company, if they've only worked for one other pest control company, they may think, oh, all pest control companies do things this way and talk about this type of stuff and use this kind of language. And I can tell you from my experience, I could work with 5 different companies, and most of the language is pretty consistent, but there are certainly certain phrases and terms and the ways that things happen that are different between those companies. So don't make the assumption that if you've brought somebody in from the outside that they're going to have all the answers or really understand how you do things. Any questions, comments, thoughts up to this point? We're going to kind of begin to transition over into, what does a manager training plan look like, and some of the pieces of that. Okay. So here's another one. I'm going to, as I tee this up, I guess I asked this question earlier about training plans. So in my experience, most companies, they have a good training plan for new hires. If you don't have it written down, I would challenge you to do that. And then just adjust it as you find areas that need to be improved. So in the chat, if you have a training plan, for technicians and CSRs in your company, give me a yes. If you don't have a written, it's got to be written. If you don't have a written plan, put no. I'm curious on the call here, who has written training plans for office people and technicians? It may look different for somebody new to the industry versus somebody who comes in with experience, but regardless, they should go through your training so they know your way. So don't just assume that an experienced person who came with high recommendations from somebody else is going to be a great fit for you. So we have a mix, in the chat here. Some people do, some people don't. Written, not written. We're in the process. And again, having that plan down. So one, you create consistency, right? As you grow as an organization, as you have different people that are involved in that training process, if everybody's looking at the same document, if everybody's following the same plan, then that you're building some level of consistency. Because, if Adam and I are on the same team as managers and we're both involved in the training process, we could have that formal training plan in front of us, but the experience that new hire is going to have is going to look a little different when they're with me than it is with Adam, because Adam's got a different personality than I do. He's got a different, teaching and training style that I do. So again, you're still going to have a little inconsistency, but at least we know the content is going to be consistent. And that's what's important, is that we know we've provided clarity. We know we've, set expectations so that, hey, I know in our training plan that you're supposed to service 6 commercial accounts with somebody. So, and then, test on it. So I know that, you have the knowledge and experience with this when we put you out on your own, that you can go out and service commercial accounts. So just having things as simple as that. So you have aligned those expectations. It's the same way with with somebody who has experience. If you've brought somebody in from another company, a lot of times people bring them in and, their training process may be, a day or two to kind of give them some highlights of some things. And they're like, hey, this person already knows what they're doing. So we're kicking them out the door and, thanks for helping us out. But they should go through the same training process. I mean, I've hired technicians that had 10, 15 years worth of experience, and I still required them to go through a 2-week training program. They were probably pulling their hair out, but I wanted to make sure, one, that they knew our systems and processes and they understood the way that we did things. It also gave my team an opportunity to see them in action. And because there have been times where we had somebody come on that we thought was going to be great for us, and a weekend we were like, this guy's not a fit for our culture and our organization. So we brought him in and cut him loose. So again, there's some value and benefit in having a formal training plan in place and running them through that. And it's the same for managers. As I mentioned at the beginning, when we kicked this off, very few organizations have any kind of plan for training managers. They just don't do it. So too many times, again, you promote the rock star on the team, and you just figure, hey, they're going to figure it out on the way, just like they did with their last role, and it'll all be good. And it really isn't fair to expect that for any, team member in any role. You guys have probably experienced this, over your careers. You see some people come in, they just pick things up like that, and they're off and running, and they do really well. And other individuals require a little more hand-holding, right? They require a little more time to learn and understand and get those things figured out. And in the end game, both of those individuals become great team members and accomplish what you need them to accomplish, but their journey there is going to look different. Again, that's why it's important that we have a plan and that we're consistent with it. So what needs to be on our training plan? And this slide deck will be available. I'll make sure that Adam has a copy of it so you guys have access to it. So you don't have to take pictures of any of this. So if we're going to put a training plan together, what are some things that we need to do? Excuse me. So first off, I would say, leadership skills. So just some basic leadership skills around things, understanding themselves, understanding other people. Again, in the chat, do you have any kind of communication assessment or personality profile that you do as a company? Yes or no? DISC, string finders, Myers-Briggs. I know there's a handful of different ones out there. So again, having some type of, profile gives you a benchmark of really beginning to understand, those tools are helpful in, just beginning to understand how people are wired, how they think, how they communicate. Are they talkers? Are they listeners? Are they more people focused, or are they more systems and task focused? Those things are helpful when you're trying to grow and develop somebody. And on the self-awareness side, when people begin to understand that about themselves, they can better navigate the people that you're now expecting them to lead and manage and work with. Next is the communication skills, right? So how do they hold a meeting? What's expected in that meeting? What's that look like? How do we have hard conversations? Too many people want to avoid having a hard conversation. So have we, equipped our managers to be able to do that in an effective way? How do they, have one-to-ones and, performance improvement plans? Managing up and down, it's different. There are some things that, you have a person who, was maybe in the field and now you've promoted them, and, they've still got buddies that are technicians that they really shouldn't be sharing stuff with. And so helping them to understand how they navigate, hey, the things you used to tell your buddies, you don't tell your buddies anymore, right? You need that needs to come up. You need to have that conversation with your manager up here and not push that down to the team. So again, just, some basic communication skills. Project management, when it comes to putting things together, understanding, when's it time to delegate? How do I know when to delegate and when to do things myself? How do I delegate effectively? Forward thinking, when you're looking at project management, you're looking at the bigger picture, right? Stepping back 30,000 feet and seeing the whole project and then beginning to build it out. Whether, starting with the end in mind, if you will, if you're a Stephen Covey guy. So, but if they've not had to think that way in the past, beginning to challenge them and equip them and help them to do that. And then lastly, business management, depending on what the expectations are for them in their role, when they were in the field servicing, they didn't have to look at spreadsheets. They didn't have to understand, what the percentage of this was to revenue and all of that type of thing. And so if in their personal life, they're not looking at any financial information and really don't understand, budgeting and all of that, that's going to be new for them. And so making sure that you're intentional about sitting down and taking the time to walk them through what that looks like and how to do that. CRM and data platforms, same with the office team. If you've got an office people who've been on the phones and, they've been in, your CRM and they understand all of that. Well, now if they're managing, do they know how to pull reports? When they look at reports, do they know what questions to ask when they see those reports, right? Just because you see data, you can send me information, but if I don't understand what that information means and I don't know where that information come from, it's really not helpful, right? So we need to help them understand how to look at that and then what questions to ask based off of it. Any questions, comments, thoughts on any of this before I kind of jump into the last few slides and we take it home? Okay. So I'm going to go through at a high level. Kind of this is a program that is out there, basically covers 6 building blocks, right? Let's see, we just had a question come in from Adam. How long do you give until you can make a decision on if the manager's the right fit? I'm sure most everybody on here has probably heard the phrase, fire fast, hire slow. I think that's the way it is with any position. If we begin to think they're the wrong person, then we make that decision. So, it's challenge. I think it can be more challenging in a leadership role in the sense that there's a lot more complexity to it. So when I worked for the regional company as operations manager, we had a guy who was a salesperson for us. I promoted him to a branch manager position. And he had been in that role for probably 6 months, 7 months, and was struggling. His office was struggling. He was struggling. And the owner of the company came to me and said, hey, I think it's time to replace this person. And I had been mentoring, not only just managing him, but I had been mentoring him. I'd been coming down and spending extra time with him, going through some of the stuff we just talked about, right? Going through financials and going through understanding people and doing these things. And I saw progress because I was closer to him than the owner of the business. And so I told the owner, I said, give me a few more months. I mean, he's turning the corner. I can see it. So this individual struggled for probably 8 or 9 months, but he was humble, hungry, and smart, right? He wasn't making bad decisions. He just didn't know what decisions to make sometimes. He wasn't, he was asking good questions. He was still learning and getting it figured out. And so sometimes it takes a little bit longer. So, but I was close enough to him to understand that, he was making the effort to go in the right direction versus somebody when you can tell that, they're toxic to the culture. Things just aren't connecting and clicking. So I think, you have to look at it from that perspective sometimes to figure it out. I can tell you that individual today serves in a senior management position in one of the largest family-owned pest control businesses in the country today. So, I'm I look at that and see that as a win for me as a young manager growing up myself and growing and developing other leaders that can make an impact on our industry. So I think it's different for different people, but it's helpful to have multiple people involved. I know, they talk about women's intuition. I'm a big believer in that. I can tell you over the years, I've worked with my office manager, with team members, and I've had them come and say, hey, something's just not right here. And, I may have had a little bit of doubt already in my head, or I maybe saw the writing on the wall that, this person may not make it out. But when that women's intuition thing comes in and supports that, 9 times out of 10, I've found that that's pretty accurate. So I think it's always helpful to have multiple people involved when you're having conversations about, how somebody's progressing and moving forward. So I know there's a long answer to that question, but I think I think there's a couple different ways to look at that. Do we recommend reviewing some of these items with the potential candidate prior to the official promotion, above and beyond providing a job description? I think we can, but I think the interview questions themselves, especially if you have somebody internal, if you've got somebody internal coming in, I think you can have some of the conversations, and through there, you're going to know and understand kind of how they're going to show up. So, but again, asking them questions as you begin to build out your hiring process, you're going to add questions, you're going to find other questions that make sense. And so again, I'd sit down I would sit down with somebody and have 3 or 4 pages worth of questions in front of me all the time. And then as I'm going through and having a conversation with them in the interview process, what they're saying or not saying helps me to know what my next question needs to be, because I have a pretty good idea of all the questions that are on the pages because I've looked at them for a long time. And so I just kind of be looking through and say, okay, this is a question I need to ask to help me understand if they, are a fit or not. So, but I think, these are some key areas that are important. So we talk about building self-awareness. I touched on this already. Some of you guys said you have, like the DISC and personality profile. Some of you don't. So self-awareness, it's really the ability to look at your own words and actions from a perspective outside of yourself. So being able to see yourself as others see you. And, it's important. We have to have a level of self-awareness to be a good leader and a manager. If we don't, we're stepping all over ourselves. We don't know the impact that our words and actions have on the people around us. You guys have all heard people don't leave companies, they leave managers, right? And it's true. Managers that people leave probably don't have much self-awareness. They're just, they have one way of doing it. It's the way that they see in their head, and they don't see anything else. So we gotta make sure that people are self-aware. So, self-confidence, some people naturally have that, others don't. Asking for help. We talked about that again already, as well as, when people come in, let them know that it's okay to ask for help. You expect them to ask for help. They're not going to have all the answers. To speak up. Not every leader and manager is an outgoing, outspoken person. You can have a leader who's a quieter type of person. But if you're putting somebody in that position for the first time and this is their first opportunity, you have to really encourage them to speak up. In some of the training I do in a different environment, we have what we call the rules of engagement for meetings. And our quietest people, we expect them to speak up first. So when we're having a meeting, if we know that 2 or 3 people on our team that are always quiet, we're like, so Alan, what do you think about this? Why don't you get it started off and give Alan a chance to talk? Because what happens in meetings, and you guys know this, your loudest people do all the talking. And then you've got, the other half of the room that never say a word. And I can tell you from experience, everybody has, most of the people on your team are going to have some good insight and perspective. And the quiet people on your team, they bring a perspective that your team needs. Unfortunately, your team doesn't hear it because, everybody, your loud voices are talking. So again, you got to encourage those people to speak up, and you've got to give them a good environment and create an environment that allows them to do so. And then last is that managing fear and stress. If you have not heard the term imposter syndrome, that's what we're talking about, right? So now you've got somebody that's a new manager, and they at times they're like, man, I'm just not qualified for this. Well, I can tell you this week alone, I've told myself that probably 3 or 4 times. I'm not qualified for this. And then I have a conversation with somebody, or I do a workshop or something happens. I'm like, oh, yeah, I am. I've got it figured out. Not to say I'm not going to have questions, and I'm not going to have certain fears around things, but reminding those individuals that, hey, I put you in this position because I've got faith in you. I know that you can be a rock star and help us out. Are you going to always have all the answers? No, but you know what? You've got what it takes to win. And so helping them understand how to manage, those things and work around that. Military does a 360-degree evaluation, evaluates 3 superiors, peers. Yeah, so 360 feedback. Yeah, and there are platforms out there that provide 360 surveys and feedback. So that's, that can be helpful as well. I was part of an organization at one point that did this kind of thing. I feel like you have some people like me that will always give you feedback, 100% honest and no matter what. But you have some individuals, it's the way they're wired, they'll never give you honest feedback, or they will rarely give you that honest feedback. So it can be challenging. It's about creating an environment where people feel safe and people know that they can come and have those conversations with you. So again, part of that self-awareness piece, right? Managing self-regulation. So again, as once we've learned about ourselves, now what do we do with that? We've got to have self-control. We've got to know how to build trust, be conscientious about things going around us, and adaptability, right? Now, if you were a technician, you knew what you were doing day in, day out. It's pretty consistent. If you were in an office, CSR or whatever, you kind of knew what your day in and day out was. Well, now that you move into this manager role, you may have to be a little more adaptive, right? I mean, one day you may be sitting in an office, scrubbing through reports and learning about all kinds of different things. And then the next day you've got to be out, servicing accounts, or you're sitting in the office on the phones. And again, just being able to make those changes and understand that that's part of what's expected of me in my new role, and being okay with that. I'm kind of cruise to the last handful of slides here because we're getting close to the end of time, and I want to make sure I leave a few minutes. Time management and prioritization. How do I handle the unexpected? How do I manage this day-to-day stuff? Again, time management. Being able to understand how to put things in the right buckets, being able to time block effectively. What is most important? What is urgent? If you haven't heard of the Eisenhower matrix, we talk about that Eisenhower matrix and how to use that in our day-to-day. The customer experience, and then delegation. Again, as you move into a leadership role, many first-time leaders want to be champions. They want to look good, and so they'll go out of their way to do more than they should, instead of delegating some of those things to other people. So helping them understand, helping that first-time manager or that new manager understand, how do I navigate that? How do I know when to make these decisions? Motivation and accountability. If this is their first time in a leadership role, they've never had to motivate anybody but themselves up to this point. So now, what does that look like for them? What is managing versus coaching, right? If you've got somebody who's been around the game a long time, managing looks different today than it did 15, 20 years ago. A coaching approach is a bigger part of successful leadership and management today. And so, understanding the difference between those two and being able to help people learn the skill set to do that effectively. Motivating former peers. You used to work side by side with this group, and now you're leading them. So how do I motivate them? How do I get them to get things done the way they need to get them done? Managing burnout. I have new stress in my life today that I didn't before, because now I'm responsible for all these people and all these things going on. How do I manage that so that I don't get burnt out? setting goals, accountability, when we begin to move into this position, hopefully we ask some questions in the interview process to know, is this person a goal setter? Do they understand how to set goals? So one, for themselves, and then, helping their people to set goals. And then what does accountability look like? We talk about hard conversations, many times the, accountability comes down to being able to really set clear expectations of what people need to do. And then we've got to hold them accountable to that. So how do we measure that? How do we reward them and recognize them for the things that they're getting done? Relationship management, again, navigating how to engage with one another, having empathy, managing conflict, among your team members, and then performance management. Again, now I'm responsible for people performing and getting things done. How do I do that? Through planning, monitoring, rating, rewarding, and development. And so just understanding the different aspects of getting your team to perform and helping them to grow and develop, right? If you're managing people and you can help them be successful, then your role becomes a lot easier. Uh-oh, where did my screen go? My last slide disappeared. There we go. Sorry, I rushed those last few slides. Oh, that is odd.
Well, if anyone has questions, definitely put them into the chat. I know we've had some questions that have come up throughout the class itself. While anyone's maybe entering that in, I just want to thank you, Kevin. I thought it was great. You gave some really, really good information. If anyone needs to get or wants to get in touch with you, I know you have your phone number here. Is there other ways? Can you drop an email in the chat or anything like that? So that way if they want to reach out.
Yeah, I'll actually, I don't know why I didn't think about this. I'll put my email address on the slide deck too before I send it out to you so that you have that. But yeah, let me drop my email address in here real quick, and we'll yeah, happy to answer any questions anybody has, or if you're Pest World next week, yeah, let's grab a coffee.
Well, thank you so much. This was really great. Really appreciate you taking the time today, and everyone for attending as well. And we hope to see you at the next business series event.
Yeah, absolutely. The next business series event will be in November, so pay attention for that coming up. But again, I just want to thank you, Kevin. I'll see you in a couple of weeks in Denver. I thought this was great and really informative, and I think it was a great way to kick off this business series. So as I said in the beginning, thank you for being our guinea pig. I really appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who showed up. You're going to get a survey afterwards just on how you felt about it. If you think anything could have been done better, maybe future topics that you'd be interested in having as well. So keep an eye out for that. And as I said in the beginning, if you can promote this to other people, the more people we have, the better it will be. So again, thank you, Kevin. I really, really appreciate it. And everyone enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, Adam.